This is our conference presentation about understanding Canadian workplace culture. As you can see, I put up some donuts because of Timmy's, which is soon to be amalgamated by Burger King from the States. And we have lots of interesting people in Canada, and they all have a different perspective, but they're all human beings, and we want to find out more about them and include them into the workplaces in a really comprehensive and welcoming way. There are some things to know about people coming into the Canadian workplace culture, and I'm going to go over some of them today. What we're going to cover is the first part is going to be a kind of a list on basic Canadian workplace etiquette. Now, after that, something about Canadian hierarchy, and then Canadian communication patterns and speech. I'm going to spend a lot of time on that because that's quite significant to becoming integrated into the workplace. And I don't think anybody else is talking about this right now in this format. And then after that, we're going to talk a little bit about what Canadian experience really means, because there are a lot of misconceptions about what that is. I'm going to tell you the good, the bad, and the ugly. So all of it, the hidden stuff as well, and how to get around it. Then we're going to do some incident analysis, and there are videos throughout, so you get a chance to see all of that stuff. Now, I wanted to give you just a little kind of an overview first before we start. Canadian workplace culture has some norms. Every country has some norms, and a norm is what most people would do most of the time. So a norm is not the same thing as a stereotype, just to clarify. A norm is something that people can do, but they don't necessarily do. And so if you see somebody do something and you see a whole bunch of people doing it, you go, oh, this must be a norm. So if everybody that you have in your closest group of friends always touches their right ear before they start speaking, then that would be considered a norm for that group. However, if you meet somebody else who's from a similar group and you automatically start touching your ear because that's what you think that group does, that's a stereotype. So a stereotype is proactive because you insist that a norm applies to everybody, whether it does or not. However, a norm is reactive because you watch to see if it happens. If it doesn't happen, you do nothing. If it does happen, you pay attention to how closely people are adhering to the norm. That's an important point. So within Canada, there is a variety of norms. So regions change. Provinces to province, there are different norms. North and south are always different in every province and in the country. And east and west are also different. There are differences between rural places, rural workplaces, and urban workplaces. And across industries, you will also find that norms are not the same. But that doesn't mean that there isn't an overarching Canadian way of doing things, which we can pick out and we're going to talk about today. So if you know what those basics are, then if you see something different, you can take note and say, is this closer or farther away from the expected Canadian norm? And it's informative for you because it gives you a better idea of how you can act. So remember that not all Canadians follow the norms, but those who don't follow the norms are probably not having such good success in their lives, because if you're always going against whatever the norms are, you're not doing that well. If you're new to Canada, it's best to look for what those norms are first. Once you know what they are, then you can bend or change them within the context where you find yourself to the degree that it's appropriate. So, and that is important to consider too. I'm just going to give you an example about a young man who talked to me a couple of months ago. He was having trouble finding work in Canada. And I asked him what he did when he talked to people when he was meeting them. And he said that he knows that Canadians are really casual. So he always puts in a few swear words and calls everybody by their first name when he first meets them. Well, I told him he's actually using a stereotype and not a norm. And that might be what he got from TV or from, something else, but that's not exactly what people expect in the workplace. And that he was limiting his work chances by trying to look too casual. And in fact, that he probably needed to clean up the way he was speaking to people and be more formal. And he was quite surprised about that because he had always believed that Canadians were just casual. So that's why you have to pay attention to what the norms are and then follow them. So once you're in the norm, you can change it depending on the context. That's my rant for the day, and I'm going to go on with the rest of the webinar. So here is another poll for you. I'm going to ask you, why are you interested in this webinar? Does this affect you directly? Are you new? Do you have a very diverse workforce? Have you experienced some conflicts? Please answer our poll, and we'll see where that goes. Okay, 3 people, 4 people, 5 people. Yes. You can answer as many of these as you like. In fact, you can actually click on all of them if you want. Great. Okay, let's get to the real. Let's see what that is. All right. So definitely affects most people's careers. They are in a diverse workforce, and they also want to improve their own awareness and capacity to be inclusive. So those are the top ones. So this is really great. I'm glad to see that. Thank you, everybody. I love it when people respond to these things. Okay, so now we're going to start with expected business etiquette. This, I'm warning you now, is a list that I'm going to just talk a little bit about with a video is coming up at the end. You can see these 3 people together. They're looking like, oh no, somebody just did something that they can't believe happened. And that's what happens when people don't follow the expected business etiquette. They may not be as obvious about it as this photo, but there's certain business protocol in every country, and wherever you go, you need to find out what that is. So here's what it is. We have a little video that we're going to show you. Oh, by the way, to hear the video, you're going to have to make sure that your computer is turned up quite loud. So make sure that you've got the sound up loud. And then we're going to, I'll start the video. So we'll play it right away.
I am trying to get healthcare and medications for my parents. They are old and don't speak English. I need a letter of permission for the health ministry. Can you write it for me? I'm so glad I have a Canadian colleague who is my friend. Now I can get things dealt with more quickly.
Well, this isn't really work-related. Why is he asking me this? Doesn't he know people don't make personal requests of a work colleague?
It's a family issue. I need your help since I don't know how to write to Canadian officials. These Canadians are so cold. In Pakistan, all relationships result in favors.
I guess I can write that for you. I feel really resentful about this. Does he think I don't have anything else to do?
Thank you. I really appreciate it. Do you know anyone who could find us a better apartment? Ours is really too small for our family. In my country, the closer you are to the boss, the more likely you are to have some extra perks. Maybe my colleague can help me with this other problem.
Can't you use an immigrant serving organization for that? It isn't my area, you know. I can't believe he's asking me this. Are all people from Pakistan so demanding?
So in that video, what you saw is 2 cultural conflicts, but that shows a few things about what are expected Canadian norms. So in the workplace, people don't like to be asked to do a lot of personal things very soon in a relationship. They need to get to know you a little bit. And asking one thing is possible because Canadians like to be helpful, but if you ask 2 or 3, it can feel very much like a burden. So that would be a typical Canadian response to a request. Not everybody would react that way, but this is a sort of a typical attitude in respect with respect to a request. So here's the expected business etiquette. When you're greeting somebody, you generally look at them, shake hands, and smile. That's important to remember those 3 things. People are often missing one. And so the smile and the greeting and the shaking of hands all have some specifics to them, which I'll get into a little bit later. If you are meeting somebody several times, you don't usually shake their hands. You still smile at them. You still look at them and say hello, but the handshaking in Canada is usually reserved to either the beginnings and endings of more formal meetings or for somebody that you're meeting for the first time. In some cultures, people shake hands every time they meet each other, or they kiss on one cheek or both cheeks, and that actually does happen in some workplaces here too. Kind of depends on the group of cultures that are there and what that workplace culture has been doing. And the next thing about on this list is privacy. Really important thing to remember about the Canadian workplace culture is privacy. People they want to keep distance. They want to make sure that nobody's infringing on their privacy and they aren't asking them private questions. And that is something that that's a very significant piece of understanding the Canadian workplace culture. Now, of course, people can be friendly, but there's still a sort of overall arching idea that there's certain things you don't ask people questions about. So you don't ask them personal questions, and you don't make comments on personal things about them. So this is one thing. Of course, time and deadlines is very big in Canada, and people are very keen on being punctual. Not quite as keen as, say, the Germans will be, but you want to be on time, and you can also be a few minutes early. If you're a lot early or if you're a lot late, that's a problem. If you're even going to be a few minutes late, it's best to text or phone or email and say, I'm going to be a few minutes late, my apologies, and let people know. If you're late the first time you meet people, it's usually not so acceptable. And deadlines are considered very serious. So if, for example, you miss a deadline, you can be in big trouble. So it's important to remember deadlines, and if you're having trouble meeting a deadline, to talk to people in advance and let them know that the deadline is coming up and you're having some difficulties, and how should you adjust it, which is another Canadian thing, which is to let people know ahead of time rather than surprising them with things. So you keep people on a trajectory of letting them know what's happening and keep them in touch with the process. Display of emotion is another important thing. This varies a lot. In Quebec, you're going to have more display of emotion, and you're going to have less as you get towards the East Coast. But basically, Canadians don't display emotion. They try to be pleasant, but they don't display emotion, and particularly not negative emotion. So if they get mad, if they get frustrated, they make any display of that, they usually get met with something looking like, oh no, this person's gone over the top. They're a little bit out of line. And if you're really loud, that's also something that's not considered to be appropriate in public. When friends get together and they're loud, that's just typical. But if it's a group of people from another country that are getting together and they're loud, and then native-born Canadians see that, they're automatically going to consider that a negative, which is unfortunate, but that's just explaining to you the way things are, not the way they should be. Okay, another thing, rules and laws are very important in Canada. And when people don't follow them or show disrespect for them, it's a huge no-no. So traffic rules and that sort of thing, lots of issues. Now, of course, people are going to say, oh, well, I know lots of people who break the law. That's true. There are always people who break the laws and who don't follow the rules. But that's going against the norm, and maybe in their context they can get away with that for a time, but it will still come back and bite them later. So it's always best, particularly if you're new to the country, to follow the rules and follow the laws. And over time, you'll find out where you have some movement and where it's more important to pay attention to certain things and less important to others. At first, people become very rigid in the way that they follow the rules. So, for example, in customer service, they won't make any exceptions. And over time, they realize that for customer service, they do need to make exceptions. But this is a question of length of time and paying attention to the norms of the workplace. There is also a hierarchy between managers and employees, which I will explain later, but in Canada, it's hidden. So people often come to Canada and they go, oh, everything's so casual here and informal, and people don't dress up at work, and there's no hierarchy, but there actually is one. It's just not obvious. Well, I'm going to talk about that a bit more later. And favors and expectations of reward. In Canada, you do not expect any favors and you don't expect any rewards. And it doesn't come because you know somebody or because you're closer to a boss. You just basically do your job and don't ask for favors and don't expect to get rewards. If occasionally you get a reward, that's great. But if you ask for one or expect one, you're likely to get a very resentful response from the Canadian that you're speaking with. Preferred managerial qualities in Canada, what's considered to be a good manager is different in every country. And in Canada, everybody may hold up this norm. They may not follow it, but this is what they're holding up as being the norm. It's basically they want a leader who listens to people, who is proactive with solving problems, who's a good team player, and who knows how to bring the team to the next level. So they have to have some authority, they have to have some knowledge and skill in their area, but they may not necessarily be the most knowledgeable and the most skilled. They're expected to have good people qualities. we're almost done with this list, and then we get into a few other things. Feel free to jump in with a question in the chat box if you have one. A little bit about once you start moving out of just the more formal business etiquette, building relationships and rapport building. Although Canadians are pretty task-oriented, but they still see relationships as being important at work. And so the overarching thing is get the job done and do it right, but make sure that you are doing it within the context of the team and that you're supporting other people and you're not being offensive. Now, the relationship building, sometimes people come to a job and they go, I'm just going to put my head down and get my job done and show that I do excellent work. That is actually a mistake because if you do that, you're likely to be rejected by your workplace team who thinks you're being superior or that you're trying to show them up. And so make sure when you're in a new job position that you spend time trying to get to know your colleagues, your peers, and asking questions about the workplace, getting to know people as much as you can, as well as doing your job. Because if you just do your job really well, you can be targeted by others, and you may not also have your contract renewed after the probation period is over. Food is often a big question for people when they come to Canada because in many cultures you always eat with others, you don't eat alone. And a lot of people in Canada eat alone. They go out by themselves, they go shopping during their lunch hour, or they eat at their desk. Now, you may feel really uncomfortable with that. So if you do, then say, gee, it would be great if we could eat lunch together, once a week or something like that. And oftentimes people will welcome that suggestion. Or you can say, could we have our coffee break together today so that we can talk about some work-related things? And people are often welcoming that too, because often my experience is that Canadians in offices are quite isolated, and they welcome someone offering to have a food sharing experience with them. But it's not a norm, but it should be. So there we go. With coffee, lunch, and dinner meetings, there's something different about each of them that you need to know. If you are taking a client out or a colleague out for coffee, if you initiate the meeting, it is considered polite to purchase the coffee. Now, again, you may not drink coffee. So some people have said to me, I don't go for coffee meetings because I don't drink coffee. You don't need to drink coffee. It's just a word that means we're going to have a short meeting. So when you go for a coffee meeting, you can have anything you like. You could have water, you can have tea, you can have whatever you like, but it's just a term. We're going out for coffee. We're going to meet about this, or let's meet for coffee. They generally don't last longer than about a half an hour. Sometimes they can go a bit longer than that. And so it's considered polite to pay for the other person if you initiated the meeting. However, if they initiated the meeting and they don't pay for your coffee, don't feel offended because that also happens. So with lunch, if you initiate the lunch and it's a client, you should offer to pay. If it's a colleague, you don't necessarily offer to pay. And lunch can be tricky because there are different cultural norms for how to eat. So the best way to figure that out is to watch the other people on how they eat and don't order anything messy. So stuff that's going to make a mess or that could, spill on you or that could be hard to deal with, like spearing a cherry tomato and it goes shooting across the room. Look for lunch items that are not going to be a problem so you can concentrate on the meeting and not on how to eat the food. But it is important to watch whatever the norms are, so how people eat, what they do with their napkin, how they use their knife and fork, watch it and copy it and do something similar. Dinner meetings happen much less frequently, but they're usually pretty formal in the sense that people are checking you out as a very important candidate, job candidate, an important business partner, or they're considering taking the next step forward in their relationship with you, with your company. So dinner meetings are really important, and you usually need to get briefed on the client and the expectations before you go for the dinner meeting. These are important, I think, things to pay attention to. Outside of work, Canadians tend to take a very long time to do invitations. And many of my immigrant friends have said to me, I've been here for 2 years and no Canadian has ever invited me for a meal. And personally, I think that's just shocking and ridiculous. Our house is always full of people that we're inviting over for a meal. So we don't follow that Canadian norm of never inviting people over. However, I do know lots of Canadians who have never once in their life ever invited anyone into their home. So it seems to be a norm. So don't get offended if it doesn't happen. People usually are more comfortable with meeting outside of their home somewhere. Once they get to know you a bit better, they may invite you to your home. But since many people don't ever invite people into their homes, don't expect it. Okay, last question. Is this really all about, is Canadian everything, snow, beer, hockey, and golf deals? Well, that depends on the context. And so my advice to people on this one is try to find different groups of whatever you're interested in. Look for people who were born here who are interested in the same thing. And you can find that through LinkedIn groups. You can find that through meetup groups. You can read the local paper. Read that. If you're in Edmonton, read the Edmonton Journal. That way you'll find out what some of the interests are that might also interest you. Listen to CBC. That's also going to tell you about things that are interesting to Canadians, also interesting to you. If you only listen to your own ethnic news station, you're not going to pick up on any of the cultural norms that are going to be necessary for you at work. And CBC is particularly good that way, so that's my pitch for CBC. And they even feature on Tuesdays, they feature at 8:15 every morning, workplace columnist Margot Ross-Graham, who does an awesome job of talking about Canadian workplace culture. So I recommend listening to that. Okay, so getting started. Presenting yourself is very important. For the handshake, make sure your handshake is firm, not limp, and don't crush anybody's bones either. So a firm and not limp handshake. And also if you're used to shaking hands with your fingertips, that's considered inappropriate. Use your whole hand when you shake. If you're worried about germs, you can wash your hands later. Eye contact, important. Make eye contact, but don't make it too long. Keep about 18 inches or 30 centimeters of space between you and the other person. And now, a few other things. Interruptions. Generally, you don't interrupt because that's considered rude. However, something important to remember is that the person with the power is the person who does the interruption. So if you interrupt once or twice, that shows that you're considering yourself on peer or equal to the other person. You have to strategically find out where you would interrupt. Hand gestures are really difficult across cultures. So until you know what the Canadian hand gestures that are appropriate and inappropriate are, I would suggest watching carefully and trying not to use hand gestures, because all of those symbols that people use are quite different across cultures. The other thing, you need to take initiative when you're presenting yourself. Don't expect other people to come up and say hello. Go do it yourself. That's a Canadian expected norm. If you're networking, there are several network opportunities. One is that you're just network normally with people that you meet. Another one is that you go to a networking event that's large. Another one is that you're at a smaller company-related networking thing where you're just being collegial. All of those have the same norms. So ask questions and show an interest in the other person. So don't just make it all about you. But always start with asking questions. Offer something about yourself, but don't tell too much personal information. Think about how you can assist, advance, or help the other person's goals. And then send up a follow-up email and phone call. That's where almost everybody falls down. 90% of people don't follow up. And if you follow up, you're much more likely to build your network, and people will think highly of you just because you followed up. So send an email, and also less and less people are phoning. So a phone call really catches people's attention. You phone and say, I sent you an email, and I'm hoping we have a chance for a coffee meeting, or thank you, really appreciated that, advice you gave me, that sort of thing. Then you do make an impression, and it sticks in people's minds. So this is the main networking stuff. And one other thing about presenting yourself, and then we move on into some of the other things. Virtual introductions are extremely important in Canadian workplace culture. I know lots of people who don't understand what those are, so I'm just going to spell that out. You meet somebody, and that person might know someone that you need to ask a question to, or they might know someone who could hire you, or they might know someone that you could talk to about whatever, right? So you say, I would love it if you could do a virtual introduction between your colleague or your friend and me. Would that be possible? So you ask for a virtual introduction. And they will respond by, say, sending an email to you and that other person saying, hi, I want to introduce you to two of you. I'm sure you have lots in common and happy connecting, or something like that. And then they, oh, I see there's a question from Hugh. Sorry, I missed that, Hugh. Hugh said, would you interrupt your manager or your manager's peer? Yes, strategically. Not often, because it will look arrogant. But if you interrupt once in a while, you are showing that you are competent. If you don't interrupt at all, then people don't take you as seriously. Okay? That's the norm. It doesn't mean you have to do that, because people have a variety of comfort zones with that. So just there. That's the answer for his question. Okay, so back to virtual introductions. Make sure when you get a virtual introduction that you thank both people. Thank the introducer, and do it within 48 hours, because if you don't, it's considered insulting. And then you ask for a phone call or a coffee meeting with that other person, and you follow up with that introducer later and say, you know, that person you introduced me to, that was really helpful. Or you follow up and say, you know, that person you introduced me to, I tried 3 times to connect with them, and they just never, responded to me. Your introducer needs to hear the feedback, so make sure you let the introducer know. Then they'll know if they should keep presenting that particular person again or not. Okay, so now, this is a tricky part. I have 2 videos that are too big to actually put onto the into the platform that we're in right now. So what I'm going to ask you to do now is to copy and paste this URL and put it into your browser. And if you do that, it will come up right away with 2 videos that I put in specifically for you. I'm going to type the URL here too so that you can see it. HTTPS. Okay, so I'm just typing it here so you can see it. And so click on that, and it should take you to the video. And it will look, so when you're on the video, if you're on the video, can you send me a note and say, yes, I've got the video to open and I can see that it's there? Because I don't know if you can access it or not. Okay, Shakina says yes, Sandra says yes. Okay, good. So now this, what I'd like you to do is watch it, and I am going to watch it too, because we won't be able to hear each other while that's happening, so I'll just be quiet. It's about 3 minutes long, and then watch it, and then there are going to be some questions about it. It's called Communication Barriers Part 2. Okay, I'm not sure if you've all finished the video, but we're going to move on to the next part of it. So basically, in this video, we showed 2 different problems, communication problems. So in the first one, the Canadian expectation was that people should participate in the meeting and should provide an opinion, and that their opinion should be informed with something that from their experience. And in the second one, people should present what they are interested in, but not in a way that it looks like it's criticizing the workplace or the boss, or appearing to not respect the team that you're working with. So now I'm going to go on to the next one. Have you ever experienced an incident like that? The videos will be, yes, available to watch later. I'm going to leave them live for 48 hours, and afterwards I'm going to close the channel down. So you will, if you don't have this video now, you can watch it later. Thanks for asking, Orlis. So can you click on the, have you experienced similar incidents? Have you experienced anything like this at work where you felt that somebody was either, not participating enough or just way over the top participating? Oh, it looks like almost everybody has. Yeah, it's common where people you're not really sure what it is. It's either not enough or too much, or you're not sure what the expected workplace norms are. Usually, you find out what those norms are when you make a mistake. So that's when you find the hidden norms. So here are the results. Everybody has experienced similar kinds of issues. So now the next one is client-facing skills, and this is something that's very important. Customer service is huge in Canada. People are very keen on customer service and making sure that we provide a really good customer service to everybody that's there. The customer is king or queen, and to do that, you need to have a positive attitude towards others, be willing to learn, and have an attitude of trying to figure out what it is that they need. That's what the customer service attitude is. You want to be polite and courteous, but don't be too differential. And that's a lot of Middle Eastern cultures are very differential in the way that they're so respectful that for Canadians it seems to be way over the top. And I had a friend once who I introduced to an engineer who I thought was who was also a musician. She was looking for a musician to play for her event, and he was an engineer, and he was looking for a promotion. And so when he talked to her, he was from Iraq, and he was very, very differential. And so he was very flattering, and he hadn't met her yet, but he told her that he was, all sorts of nice things about her, and she was so suspicious of him because she thought, what does he want from me that he's just saying all these compliments to me? So you want to be polite and courteous, but not too much over the top. Professional, not cool, but not too warm either, because if you're too warm, people think you want something from them. So the Canadian hierarchy. Canadians seem informal and they seem casual, but there is a cloaked hierarchy. You really need to address your superiors formally until you know them, and then address them the way your colleagues do. So see whatever your colleagues do and copy them. You can make suggestions, but the decisions always rest with the management. And it's very important to cultivate your allies, so who are your friends, who are going to support you, and your networks if you want to advance. If you don't develop your network, you won't advance. Networking and process are very important in the Canadian hierarchy. The expectations are that you speak up and say what you mean, but do it politely. Don't show negative emotions, and be humble. Humility is a very big Canadian virtue. So, for example, if you win something, instead of saying, yeah, I'm terrific, you would say, that was great, but I couldn't have done it without the help of my team. So show humility in everything, because that's extremely important. In some cultures, you should brag a little bit about your accomplishments, but when you do that here, it really doesn't get you any points. People also expect you to answer questions directly if it's a direct question. For example, is the job done? They expect a direct answer. We already talked about favors and privileges. And another important thing is to only offer help if you mean it. So, for example, don't say, oh, yeah, I really don't have much to do, so I'm going to help you, with your files. I'll help you with this, I'll help you with that. But you don't intend to do it. Don't offer it, because it's going to look bad for you later. Your Lennis is asking, when you say develop allies and network, do you mean at work? Yes, that's what I mean. I mean at work. You need to know who's on your side for stuff and who isn't, and how you can win over the people that aren't. It's about strategically developing your workplace relationships. Okay, so we have another little video here. This one you can hear. If you turn up the volume on your computer, you will hear it. I'm going to play this one now. It's a short one.
I'm so glad to meet you.
I'm happy it worked out. This is Sonia.
I wanted to show you my skills and experience. Here is my resume.
Well, maybe after dinner?
Sure, I can wait.
So, where did you two meet?
She presented at the company I used to work for, and I thought, hey, I could do that. So that's why I'm here. I remember everything you said. Excuse me, ladies.
I remember her. She left after the first training session.
You can see I have lots of credentials. I look forward to hearing from you.
Sure. Well, I'll let you know if anything comes up.
Okay, so for that particular video clip, what we had was somebody who was not observing the expected norms. And so what do you think this job seeker was doing wrong according to Canadian cultural norms. So just this time you need to type in your answer. And if you have any trouble using that box, type it into the chat box. But what do you think the job seeker did wrong? Just mention one or two things that came up as you watched it. Too pushy, yes, for sure. Keep typing. Don't hesitate to type. She presented the resume at the wrong time. Yes, right. Aggressive. Oh, you guys are good. So yes, she was asking for a job offer during a time when you should have been paying attention to the meal. She's too direct in the beginning. Another thing she did was she didn't pay attention to the other colleague. So the other person was trying to introduce her to the other colleague, and she just ignored the other colleague. And yes, there was an assumption that a prior acquaintance would give her the job. And also she didn't leave a good impression from her first the first time that she'd met somebody, but she didn't check to know what her impression was. She just assumed it was going to be good. And then she kind of insulted the Mavis by saying to her, I could do your job. I watched it for 10 minutes and I figured I could do your job. So most people get kind of insulted when somebody says something like that to them. So now I later asked this woman about this particular thing that she'd done, and when she explained it to me, and she said that she thought, well, Canadians are very direct and therefore I should be direct. And that was her mistake. So she used a stereotype instead of a cultural norm. And that Canadians are only direct in certain circumstances, which we're going to talk about right now. Here it is. Canadians are direct if they want information because they have a strong desire for clarity. So if you say, how do I get to West Edmonton Mall? You expect a direct answer. And if you don't know the answer, you expect people to say, I don't know how to get there. Maybe someone else can help you. So that would be direct for information. However, as soon as there's the slightest possibility there may be conflict, Canadians become extremely indirect because Canadians, on the whole, are highly conflict averse. And so this is the bind that most newcomers have trouble with when they come to Canada. They don't know when Canadians are direct and when they're indirect. But these two things can help you. Remember that if it's just based informationally, it's going to be direct, and they're going to expect a direct answer from you. However, if there's a possibility something could go wrong, then it's going to be very indirect. I'm going to show you some examples. So here's the Canadian employer. Did you get the file ready for client XYZ so we can present tomorrow at 9? Not yet. I still have to complete the second half of the report, which I'll work on this afternoon. That was a direct answer to a direct question. Then the employer says, I need to see it this afternoon in case there are any changes required. Can you have it on my desk by 3? And the employee says, I can do that. And the reason they did that is because there was no possibility of conflict. They both knew there wasn't going to be an issue. Okay, now, let's say that the Canadian manager is worried that the employee is not going to get the job done on time. Then we switch immediately to indirect. And so the manager says, I'm wondering if client XYZ file is progressing. Do you have an update? So I'm wondering is a speech softener, an indirect speech softener. And instead of saying, did you do the work on the file, that it's indirect by saying, is the file progressing, as if the file could just jump up and progress on its own. That's a speech softener. Okay? And then, is that the one we need for tomorrow at 9? Yes. What's your progress report? So instead of saying, yes, how much have you got done? It was, what's your progress report? So it's softer. And then the person says, well, I haven't finished it yet. And so then the worried manager says, of course I'm confident, which doesn't mean they're confident. It means they're not confident. Of course I'm confident that you'll get it done on time. I'm just checking. But really that means I'm worried. Get on it, right? So in this case, the manager is worried, very worried, that the other thing is not going to get done. And they add speech softeners. This is so important. And the person who first started talking about this, from who I can tell, his name is Paul Holmes. He did a lot of research, linguistics research on Canadian speech patterns. And because because he was frustrated when he came here. He went, I just don't get it. What it is, how are Canadians speaking? This is it. This is the clue. This is how you get promoted. This is how you understand misunderstandings. This is how you get past problems. It's all about speech softeners. I'm going to show you some more. So there are 4 C's of Canadian communication, according to Paul Holmes. The first one is clarity. And the clarity is your responsibility. Who's speaking? The person who's speaking is the one who has to make your intention known. You have to be very clear pronunciation, look direct at people as you speak, know what you're going to say before you say it, be clear. Okay. Next thing, conciseness. Explanation should be short and to the point. Timely, factual speech. Okay, so make sure that you give what the person needs and don't go on and on about it. Don't give them a story. Stories are reserved for other times. Now, Vince had a comment. He says, how people say the opposite of what they mean. I'm confident when I'm worried. Yeah. Part of speech softeners we'll explain more about speech softeners in a minute. I'm getting to that comment, Vince. Okay, coherence. What you say should show a logical sequence. So you don't want to jump around chronologically, because time is so important in Canadian culture. You have to make sure you go in chronological order what happened, or in order of importance, and state that, because that's part of clarity. So you go, okay, I'm going to explain this in order of importance, from most to least, or least to worst, least important. Or you say, I'm going to explain this in the order that it occurred. Be clear. Back it up with evidence. That's the coherence. And the last, so all of those things really matter. Now, I'm worried we will run out of time if I show you this speech softeners video, so I'm going to leave it open so you can watch it later. But basically, it's about drawing consensus, and that's the 4th C of Canadian communication, which is drawing other people into the communications without telling them what to do. So you use a speech softener to get other people to agree to what you want them to do, and to have also to give them a way out if they don't want to do it. So I'm wondering if you could get this ready by the end of the day today. What they really want to say is, could you get this done by noon, because I'm worried it won't be done by the end of the day. But I'm wondering if you could get this done by the end of the day today. Okay, so that way you can say, well, gee, I don't think I'm going to have time. So it gives you a way out. Or you could say, oh, no problem, it's already done. You see, so this is the point of the speech softener, is to allow a space for the person to come in and agree or disagree without losing face. Okay, here's some examples. Could you have it on my desk by 3? I'm wondering how the file is progressing. Also being very polite. Excuse me, do you mind passing that file, please? Instead of saying you don't get something, I'm not sure I understand. That way you're not saying, I don't get it. You're not being clear. You're going, I'm not sure I understand. Maybe in your last workplace we did that, but here we usually do this. This is how we do things around here. We say, usually we do it this way. Those are all speech softeners, and if you practice them, you are likely to get promoted. If you can't use speech softeners, you are likely not to ever be promoted. Speech softeners are key to advancing in the Canadian workplace. Okay, now let's get into, so you're in. Now how do you do it? So Canadian experience, everybody's all worried about that because they don't really know what it means. How are you supposed to have experience before you get experience? It's crazy. So this is what it means. How comfortable is the cultural difference when we talk to each other? If I feel like there's a big canyon of cultural difference between me and you, I will be telling you you don't have Canadian experience. That's usually what it means. Do you know what the Canadian workplace norms are? Okay, if you know what those norms are, then I won't have to explain them to you. And that leads to the third one. Is it going to be a lot of extra work for me to train you? So people are always extra work when they come into a company, but they're worried that somebody from another country is going to be way extra work. And then they may not be a good fit for the company even after all of that. So there's a whole lot of fear. And since Canadians tend to be risk-averse, they have trouble with this. And so the way to get around the Canadian experience thing is to see what you can do to make people feel comfortable. I have a daughter who's Haitian, and she called me last night from having been to a job fair. And she went out of her way to bridge the cultural divide. When she went there, she was friendly, she was confident, she was firm, she was interested in the other people, and she showed from the way that she was meeting people that she knows about the Canadian workplace norms and that she was not going to be a lot of extra work to hire. She got 3 job offers, and it's because she put so much effort into thinking about how to bridge that cultural divide between her and the employers. Now, sometimes people use Canadian experience as a screen. They go, will this foreign employee make me look bad because they know more than me? That's huge because, most people coming from other countries in Canada, most of them, like I don't have the exact percentage right now in front of me, but I'm sure it's close to 80%, are much more educated than native-born Canadians. So people that are hiring you have less education and maybe even less experience in the area, and they're worried they're going to look bad because you know more than they do. That's another issue. Or they say, we have never hired people from that culture. Why should we start now? Because they're scared of the risk. Or how much effort does it take for me to understand this accent? If they think it's going to take too much effort, then they don't want to put the effort into it. Another thing is name prejudice. So people will go, can I even pronounce the same? No, next. And that is a common problem. People's resumes are rejected because of their name. So now this is all, like I said, I was going to tell you the good, the bad, and the ugly. So it's not great, but this is the reality of how some people use Canadian experience. So the one we saw before, it's understandable that the cultural difference is going to make people uncomfortable and that they're worried about work. This one gets to be a little bit yuckier because really it's not great. So the good stuff, how do you get around those problems? Well, volunteer somewhere to mainstream, like the YMCA or something, to learn cultural norms. Those are all places where you can meet people and find out what the norms are. Find some Canadians to connect with and ask them questions and be open. And identify your own bias because no culture's all good or all bad, and everybody's got good and bad from their cultures that they need to see more clearly. And then if you're applying for anywhere, look for signs of diversity and inclusion before you even apply. And then your likelihood of getting it is going to be much higher. Now, this is the bad stuff, and you're going to think it's pretty controversial, but these are things that people have told me that they do. Okay, so I'm not saying, yes, you should do this. I'm saying people told me they did this and that it was helpful for them. You don't have to do it, okay? Just so you know. You can modify your accent on sounds that are problematic. There are apps, there are accent coaches, there are YouTubes, there's things. If you think your accent is getting in the way, find out which things are the worst, problematic for people and correct them. My son is Canadian. He lives in the United States. He changed his accent on the way he ends certain kinds of sentences and 3 sounds. And he got work immediately as soon as he did it. So he wasn't changing a whole bunch. He was changing a little bit. And you wouldn't think there's such a big difference between Canadian and American accents, but he was getting no work until he made those modifications to his accent. They thought he was too Canadian, so they didn't want to hire him. Okay. People have also created a Canadian nickname. I have one friend in this Farhad. He tells everyone to call him Fred. He uses that on his resume. And he calls himself Fred and then his last name. So he's got his people then don't feel so unfamiliar with his name. People also dumb down their resumes because of the problem of them being more educated and having more experience. So they take their resumes and put in only what's most pertinent to the company and don't put in all the extra stuff about the education and the experience that's going to make the employer think that you're way better than they are. Another thing, and this can be good or bad, it depends. So I put in this one is, think about ways you can build up the company, your colleagues, and your boss so they feel you're part of their team. Now, they should be working to include you. And it's not that you should do this insincerely, but really that paying attention to your team is very, very important. And the reason people's contracts are not renewed is because they missed something on the team. And usually it has to do with they were too busy doing such a great job that they didn't develop their relationships with their colleagues. So think about that. Now, I'm just going to, with a little bit here, we're going to do incident analysis. We only have time, I think, to do one, but what I'm going to do is there are 3 of them, and you will get the slides so you can look at it later. So we have 3. You tell me which one you want. First one's about a Ukrainian employee that had an assumption about a promotion, and the second one is about Chinese New Year and people taking time off work because they didn't think that their employer was going to give it to them. And then the third one is there are 2 female African employees who refuse to work with each other. And they're from the same country. So type a little something into the chat box. Which of those 3 would you like to do? Because we only have time to do one. So there's the Ukrainian promotion incident. There's the misunderstanding between 2 people from the same country. I'm not getting any responses. Can you guys tell me what you'd like to do? And there was the Chinese New Year one. So I shouldn't even have asked that question because, look, we've got a 1, a 3, a 2, and a 2. Okay, looks like we've got more 2. So we will do 2. Okay. You have them all anyway because you're going to get them in the download. So these are all from the employer's standpoint. So you can try and think like what's happening in the employer's mind. So during the Chinese New Year season, you had a majority of your Chinese employees because they just hired 10 Chinese employees, and they all 9 of them phoned in sick during Chinese New Year, and so they didn't want that to happen because it caused them so many problems. So the Canadian employer has a different concern than the Chinese employee, and they're coming to it from different experience, from the background. So since we don't have time to discuss the details of it, I'll just send you, this is what the manager is thinking. He's going, what makes them think they can take time off work without making a formal request? What does this tell you? Rules in Canada are very important. You need to make a formal request and follow the protocol. Okay? The employees say there's no point in asking for the holiday because the company won't give it to us. Now, either that's because that's what they've already experienced in their country, or it's because that's the experience they have with the company. And so, you make a formal request and it doesn't happen anyway. So that's the scoop for that. You can look at the rest of these later. I think you'll find them insightful. They give you some ideas on cultural clues. And I'm hoping you want to learn more because there is a way to learn more. You will have this in the download that you can get. And we also have a course called Work and Culture Online, which is starting this Friday, a facilitated version of it. It's always online, but you can also look at the facilitated version. You go to workandculture.com. You will see the screen. And then you go to the one that's circled, which is the facilitated course, which is starting on Friday. Click in the registration, and you're done. And you can attend it. We have some upcoming webinars. And the next one is going to be what you need to know as a new immigrant looking for work in Canada, and it's going to be 3 immigrant serving organization specialists giving us their advice. We hope if you're not on our mailing list that we can still contact you, so please click yes, and then we will go on. Thank you, everybody, for doing that. That's just wonderful. And we hope you loved the webinar, so let us know if you loved it. And I hope it's very helpful, and you're going to get some very helpful downloads, 3 of them, in the survey that's coming to you shortly. So thank you, everybody, so much for attending the webinar. I hope you found this useful and that you will be able to put it to practice in your lives and the lives of people around you. And we look forward to having you at upcoming webinars. Have a wonderful afternoon, everybody. Bye-bye.